7-day resting heart rate average is again down to 46. I got this watch about 2 months ago. I put it on and it was 52. Then I adhered to my health plan schedule of eating properly, of training properly. It went down to 51, then to 50, then to 49, then to 48, then to 47, eventually to 46. Then I basically didn't adhere as much to my health plan. I skipped a few workouts. And after about 2 weeks, I was at 52 back again. And then, you might have guessed it, it seems that resting heart rate, and especially maybe the 7-day average, is a latent enough measure to measure the last weeks. But it's also flexible enough to then show you the changes you made. Therefore, besides VO2 max and the difficult to calculate biological age, it just might be one of the tools, one of the metrics you can use in order to monitor your health, at least your cardiovascular health, because obviously it doesn't measure your strength. It only measures how little your heart has to pump in a given time frame, which is the minute, over the average of a week, whenever resting. In a recent video on Andrew Steele's YouTube channel, there was this doctor from Midlife Crisis, and he basically said that VO2 max was the one indicative value that would indicate overall health. The second one, but here is the problem with VO2 max. So my Garmin watch also calculates VO2 max. It actually also went up from 52 to 53 milliliters per kilogram per minute, as you can see, which is still fairly low, I would say. The record numbers go almost up to 100, so for this reason I might be able to still improve this a little. I recently asked myself, not really myself, but much more, I consumed a lot of content that led to the question, what is the one metric that I can use in order to basically indicate my overall health? And the one metric you can use, and everybody understands, is probably biological age. Brian Johnson is steering the way in terms of turning this into something that has more of a broader understanding. He tries to rejuvenate himself, and he already made some progress in it. The problem with biological age are twofold, I would say, or the problem is twofold. The first one is that there is no real established science behind it. There is some emerging science and also in medicine that standardizes these calculations, but it's not basically, there is no gold standard yet. And the second problem, therefore, is also, of course, correlated to this, is that there currently is a very high cost of entry into biological age. Ideally, you would measure something like this all the time. It would be on your wrist and you would see it. If it is the measurement that makes sense the most to display on your wrist. And therefore, I think that you have to replace it with something else. It's not only that I think, but also that other people think this. And maybe I just think it because of this. So what else would be good metrics? Your strength would be a good metric, but again, in order to understand it, in order to make it easy, in order to make a change visible, maybe even with a Galaxy, not a Galaxy, but a watch face on your smartwatch, it has ideally to be one number. And this one number now could be VO2 max. Now VO2 max is similar in its problem of measuring it. So there are institutions that basically allow you to measure your actual VO2 max. And this again is something similar to drawing blood, which is fairly expensive, and there are not a lot of institutions. Maybe in the city I live in, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 institutions will do it. And therefore it is a whole process. You have to go there. It is like a doctor's appointment basically. Then you run on a treadmill, and then they measure how much oxygen you actually consumed during a given run, which increases in intensity. For this reason, there are also calculations, so estimates, and Garmin also does an estimate, and the 53 I showed you earlier is an estimate that is based on, at least according to Wikipedia, for example, on the heart rate ratio method, which is VO2 max equals heart rate max divided by heart rate rest times 15 times 2, and then you have the milliliters per kilogram times the minute. I don't know if this is the formula also Garmin uses for their calculations. But in order to influence it, if this was the formula, you have to get your heart rate during rest down and your heart rate max up. So it's basically kind of based on the difference between those two. And lowering the resting heart rate again leads us back to the resting heart rate itself, which is basically influencing VO2 max, at least to a certain extent, and is also more easy measurable, because every heart rate tracker can basically measure it whenever you're resting. So for this reason, currently I think, it's not that I think, it's just that Midlife Crisis, the doctor, said it on Andrew Steele's channel, that VO2 max would be the most obvious thing as a single indicator of your overall health, but it is expensive and you cannot measure it all the time, so I'm just repeating his words, paraphrasing basically, and therefore resting heart rate would be the one to go to. Garmin offers, at least here on this watch, the one that I can access for this watch face, a 7-day resting heart rate average that I can display here, and for this reason I display it here, and this makes change visible. It is latent enough, so there is a little bit of latency, there is a little bit of time that has to go by until change shows. It seemingly is my resting heart rate. It could also be a calculation, I'm not entirely sure if it actually is the resting heart rate that is measured during a given night, for example, of sleep. But at this point in time, I mean, of course, it still could be either purely placebo, but I don't think so. At around Christmas, I got sick for about 1 or 2 weeks, which was quite unusual for me, because usually I just am not sick, I would say. Sometimes I get the keto flu when I fast too much, and therefore the electrolyte balance, which I still haven't quite figured out, causes basically my body to kind of shut down for a day, which means that I have headaches and stomach pain, up to the point where I cannot do that much. And before Christmas, right around before Christmas, there was such a period, and in this period, a few weeks later, I got the watch, and therefore I probably had, for this reason, a higher value. Of course, this could now be just my interpretation of it. It also just could be purely coincidence. But if I, let's say, do 3 cardio sessions in a given week, and I'm fairly productive in at least what Garmin says I am productive, or so in terms of my training status, I can be productive, I can be basically maintaining, and I can be too low on basically I should do more activity. And it just seems to be too much of a coincidence that it now happened 2 times. I was at 52, then I went down to 46, then I went up to 52, then I again now went down to 46 in almost about the same time frame. The other factors are also very similar. My nutrition got slightly worse, I didn't do as much workouts, I basically skipped a few, and after 3 days of just sitting around, after 4 days or 5 days of sitting around, my heart rate began to go up again, my resting heart rate over the period of 7 days and the average thereof. Almost as if once I had fully regenerated from the previous workouts I had before I stopped working out for a few days, it basically catched up, and then as soon as I was not progressing anymore, my resting heart rate 7-day average also went up, even though it's the average of the last 7 days, which would make not that much sense, but seemingly it is a measurement that is probably, at least in my eyes, worth having on your watch.